Welcome, everyone, to our very first episode of the BIO259 Recap Podcast. My name is Eric, and alongside me is Dr. Rosario, your go-to guide for making sense of human anatomy and physiology. Every week, we'll be breaking down what you learned in class, answering your burning questions, and maybe even helping you not only survive, but thrive in BIO259. Dr. Rosario, how excited are we to kick things off?
Oh, Eric, I am pumped. Seriously, this is like the perfect way to keep everyone sharp and on track while giving me a chance to geek out over all things anatomy and physiology. I mean, for those of you new to this class or just tuning in, Bio 259 is intense, but it's also an incredible journey into understanding how our bodies tick. I'm so excited to dive in.
Absolutely. And before we dive deeper, let's start with some quick housekeeping for the students out there. Dr. Rosario, I understand there's a big due date looming.
Yes, this is your friendly reminder. Okay, maybe it's more like me waving a giant red flag with the words, don't forget. Your first mastering assignment is due Monday at midnight, 11:59 p.m. sharp. The assignment has e-text readings and some sample questions. I promise it's not going to take up your whole weekend, but you'll want to carve out some time to get it done. Plus, we've already covered all the material in class, so you're set up to tackle it.
Perfect advice. And hey, listeners, remember staying ahead on these assignments makes a huge difference, especially with how fast paced this course is. How do you recommend students approach it, Dr. Rosario?
Honestly, just start with the readings. Even if you're like, ugh, why do I need to know this much detail? Trust me, it all connects later. The sample questions will help you lock in the key points. And like I always say, if you use what you're learning right away, it'll stick. And this is huge. Don't procrastinate. The more you engage with this early material, the smoother your semester will be.
Building on what you said about everything connecting, Dr. Rosario, let's dive into one of the big ideas from this week: structuring the human body. This course isn't just about memorizing lists of terms, right? It's really about making sense of how all the parts work together in harmony.
Exactly, Eric. It's all about the relationship between structure and function, what we call form function relationships. And this is what makes anatomy and physiology such a fascinating subject. One of my favorite examples, and we talked about this in class, is the humerus. You know, the big bone in your upper arm?
Yeah, the one connecting the shoulder to the elbow. That's the one, right?
Exactly. So let's take the head of the humerus, for example. It's round, designed to fit smoothly into the shoulder socket. That shape gives it a lot of mobility, which is why your shoulder can move in nearly any direction. It's also covered in cartilage to reduce friction. It's basically nature's own engineering marvel.
Wow. So the shape isn't just for looks. It's the key to how the joint itself functions. It's such a simple example, but it really brings the concept home.
And it doesn't stop there. Think about your elbow, for instance. There's a structure at the bottom of the humerus called the trochlea. It's shaped kind of like a squished marshmallow. Because of that groove, your elbow joint can only rotate in one direction. That's the anatomy controlling how you flex or extend your arm. No squished marshmallow, no single axis movement.
That's fascinating. This interplay between structure and function is such a recurring theme in what you teach. But it's not just at the joint level, right?
You've got it. We can actually dive deeper, way deeper, in fact. The human body is organized into these incredible layers, starting all the way from macromolecules like proteins and lipids, building up to cells, tissues, organs, and finally entire organ systems. It's like assembling a puzzle, except every piece has a specific role in how the body functions as a whole.
It must have been a lot for students to take in so early in the semester. How do you help them keep these levels of organization straight?
Oh, I'm all about the mental hierarchies. I tell them to visualize it like a pyramid, macromolecules at the base, organ systems at the top. I also sneak in analogies, like I'll say your cells are the parts of an engine, tissues are like the components of that engine, and organs are the fully assembled system.
It's a great framework. Now, another essential piece for navigating anatomy has to be terminology, right?
Oh, no question. Terms like cranial and caudal, medial and lateral, these aren't just words. They're tools that let us pinpoint exact locations in the body. I mean, imagine trying to give a surgeon directions without them. It'd be like saying, fix the thing kind of to the left of the other thing. No thanks.
I can see how that'd be a nightmare. So, what's the key to really mastering these terms?
Practice, practice, practice. We do a lot of examples in class, like your nose is medial to your ear or your knee is distal to your hip. Plus, I encourage students to quiz themselves constantly. It's like learning a new language. Start small, and before you know it, you can describe the most complex structures with confidence.
Dr. Rosario, it's clear that mastering this material takes time and practice. Students start to get the hang of those mental hierarchies and terms, but let's be real. This class isn't exactly a walk in the park. What's one concept that tends to trip them up early on?
I think one big one is body cavities, like dorsal cavity, ventral cavity. It's one of those topics that seems straightforward at first, but then it's like, wait, where does the thoracic cavity go again? And what's in the mediastinum? It can snowball quickly.
That does sound overwhelming. So, how do you recommend students tackle that topic without pulling their hair out?
Visualization is the secret weapon. I always tell students to grab a good diagram and physically trace it with their finger, like imagine holding a pencil and marking out, here's the thoracic cavity, these are the lungs, here's the heart in the pericardial cavity. That tactile connection helps it stick. And of course, my other trick, keep your lecture notes handy and break the content into small, digestible chunks. Don't try to memorize everything in one sitting. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Great advice. And I know anatomy and physiology aren't just about memorizing details, they're about integrating concepts. How can students make those connections between how things are structured and what they do?
Oh, absolutely, Eric. Integration is key. I always encourage students to take what we discuss in lecture, then reinforce it with what they see in the labs. For example, let's say we're studying a bone like the humerus. Sure, you can memorize that it has a rounded head, but then in lab, really look at it. Pick it up, see how it fits into the joint, then write out in your own words why that rounded shape gives you so much shoulder mobility. Trust me, connecting those dots turns that knowledge into something you own rather than just something you crammed for an exam.
That's such a hands on way of learning. It's more than just staring at a textbook. And speaking of building confidence, I know students often feel like they're the only ones struggling to keep up. Do you have any words of motivation for them?
Oh man, definitely. And you know what? I'll share a little story. When I first started studying anatomy, I struggled hard, especially with the terminology. I'd sit there like, what even is a trochlea? But I found that using a system, a little flashcard, a bunch of sticky notes around my room, it worked wonders. I even made up little stories in my head to associate terms with their functions. And here I am now, geeking out about all this stuff with you. So, students, if your brain feels like it's going to fry after one too many cranial vias caudal questions, just know you're not alone. Stick with it. It clicks eventually, I promise.
That's inspiring, Dr. Rosario. And honestly, what better proof than hearing it from someone who's been through it themselves? So, wrapping up, what's your biggest takeaway for students this week?
Biggest takeaway: patience and persistence. This course is a challenge, but it's one you can absolutely conquer. Every term you learn, every lab session, it's building a foundation for understanding how your body operates. So keep showing up, stay curious, and cut yourself some slack if it doesn't all make sense at first. You've got this.
Well said. And on that note, thanks everyone for listening and for joining us on this first episode. Keep your notes handy, remember those diagrams, and don't forget to submit that mastering assignment by Monday night. We'll talk to you all next week. Have a great one.
See you next time, everyone. Stay awesome and stay curious.